Greetings, traveler. I'm glad to see you in my tavern. Here you may rest after a hard road, drink a mug of good ale, and listen to an old, honest witcher's tale, one that smells of smoke, winding roads, and silver coins. The road to Holmick wound through rolling fields of rye, golden and whispering under the weight of the summer sun. The air shimmered with heat. Even the wind seemed too weary to move. Geralt of Rivia guided his mare, Roach, along the dusty track, his white hair tied back, his amber eyes half hidden beneath his hood. The path had brought him this way, though, as always, it wasn't the path that chose him, but coin. And coin had been scarce of late. Nilfgaardian patrols roamed the southern roads. The wars had emptied villages, and with no harvest, there were few who could pay for a witcher's sword. Still, monsters didn't vanish just because peasants had empty pockets. They only multiplied. The witcher passed a wooden post marking the edge of Holmwick's land, a crude carving of Melitele, her face half eroded by rain. Around the base of the statue lay offerings, a crust of bread, wilted flowers, a lock of hair bound with ribbon. Such things were meant to protect the village from the restless dead. Geralt glanced at them, then at the tracks in the dust. Small feet, hurried ones, leading from the road toward the fields. He frowned. He smelled the village before he saw it, the scent of damp earth, smoke, and rye. Holmwick was a cluster of thatched huts crouched beside a stream, hemmed in by endless grain. Women hung laundry, men mended tools, and a few children paused in their play to stare at the stranger in the black and silver armor. Geralt dismounted before the inn, a sagging building with a faded sign showing a sheaf of grain. The villagers fell silent. Witchers were not a common sight here. A man in a patched tunic approached, wiping his hands on his belt. "You're a witcher, aye? A monster hunter?" Geralt nodded. "That's right." The man shifted uneasily. "You'll be wanting to speak to Alderman Toden then. He's the one what posted the notice about the thing in the rye." Geralt tied Roach by the trough. "Lead the way." The alderman's house stood near the well, larger than most but no cleaner. Inside, the air was heavy with tallow smoke and fear. Toden was a stout man with a face like a bruised apple. He looked Geralt up and down, swallowed hard, and gestured for him to sit. "You've heard, I reckon?" Toden began, voice low. "The fields are cursed. Come noon, when the sun's high, a spirit walks among the rye. Folks say it's a woman, white as milk, eyes like fire. She sings, calls the harvesters by name, and when they answer, they die." Geralt leaned back. "How many?" "4 men this week. Their wives found them stretched on the ground, skin all dry, mouths full of dust. No blood left in 'em." Geralt rubbed his chin. "A Noonwraith, most likely." Toden crossed himself. "Aye, so we've been told." "You'll take the job, then?" "That depends." "On what?" "On what you can pay." The alderman winced, glancing toward a chest in the corner. "We've little enough, Witcher. Grain's what we have, and a few crowns scraped together." "Show me." Toden opened the chest. Inside lay a small pouch of coins, perhaps 30 crowns, and a loaf of bread hard as stone. Geralt sighed inwardly. Not much, but he'd seen villages starve and still offer less. "Fine," he said. "I'll look into it, but I'll need to know everything. Who the spirit was in life when she first appeared, and what's been done since." The alderman nodded quickly. "We think it's Maritka. She was to be wed last summer. a pretty lass, always singing in the fields. But come the day of her wedding, she never reached the chapel. They found her out there among the rye, throat cut clean through. Her betrothed Ulrin swore vengeance, but before the week was done, he was found dead too. Looked as if the sun had burnt him from within. Geralt's eyes narrowed. And after that? Nothing for near a year. Then come the harvest, she returned. Or something that wears her face did. Geralt stood. I'll need to see the place where she died. Toden hesitated. At noon? The Witcher's mouth curved faintly. No, I'm not that foolish. Dusk will do. Outside the sun was sinking, painting the rye fields in bronze and blood. Geralt saddled Roach and followed the alderman down a narrow path between the stalks. The fields rustled like whispers, and the air smelled faintly of iron. They stopped at a ring of trampled grain. The earth there was blackened, as though scorched. In the center lay a fragment of white fabric, perhaps once a veil. Geralt crouched, lifting it between gloved fingers. Blood, he murmured, old, human. He drew a small vial from his belt and poured a few drops over the soil. The fluid hissed faintly, turning pale green. Signs of lingering magic. He marked the spot with a sprig of verbena and stood. Keep your folk out of the fields till I'm done, he said. Toden nodded fervently. You'll be able to lay her to rest? Geralt met his eyes. If the story's true, yes, but spirits like these rarely rise from simple sorrow. There's usually something fouler beneath. As he walked back to the village, the last light faded behind the hills. The rye swayed softly in the twilight, golden blades whispering secrets to the dark. Somewhere far off, a woman's laughter drifted on the wind, soft, sweet, and terribly sad. Geralt paused, hand on the hilt of his silver sword. The path, it seemed, had found him again. Geralt rose before dawn. The village still slept beneath a blanket of mist, the fields stretching out like a pale ocean beyond the low thatched roofs. The Witcher sat by the hearth in the inn's common room, sharpening his silver sword with slow, steady strokes. The blade caught the firelight, gleaming faintly with runes etched along its length. He listened to the whetstone's whisper, an old, familiar rhythm that steadied the mind before work. When he stepped outside, the morning smelled of dew and smoke. Roach waited by the trough, stamping restlessly. Geralt checked his saddlebags, potions, bombs, oils, and then slipped into the fields, where the dawn light turned the rye to gold. The signs of the curse were clearer in daylight. The stalks grew unevenly here, some blackened, others bent in unnatural arcs as if pressed by unseen hands. Geralt crouched and examined the soil. It was damp, but beneath the surface lay fine ash, human remains, most likely, burnt by the heat of the Noonwraith's passing. He traced a simple glyph in the air, murmuring an incantation. The sign of Eärden shimmered faintly, spreading like a violet mist over the ground. The air rippled, images flickered, shadows of the past, impressions left by strong emotion. A young woman running through the rye, veil fluttering, another figure pursuing her. A glint of steel, a cry cut short, then darkness. The vision broke. Geralt straightened, frowning. The ghost had not simply risen by chance. It was bound to this place and bound by something left unresolved. Noonwraiths were born of betrayal and violence, yes, but rarely did they linger so long unless someone had tampered with their memory, twisting their grief into rage. Geralt followed the trail toward the northern edge of the field. There, beside a lonely willow, stood a weathered shrine, Offerings lay scattered, dried herbs, pieces of bread, a silver earring blackened by age. Among them he found a torn scrap of parchment smudged by dirt and damp. The ink had faded, but a few words remained visible. "Forgive me, sister." He tucked it into his pouch. Behind him, footsteps crunched on the path. He turned, hand resting lightly on his sword. It was a young woman, pale and slight, her dress plain but clean. She stopped a few paces away and bowed her head. "You're the Witcher," she said softly. "The alderman told us you'd come." "That's right," Geralt replied. "And you are?" "Elena, Maritka's sister." Geralt studied her. She resembled the shade he'd seen in his vision. Same fair hair, same sharp jaw. Only her eyes were different. Where the ghosts had burned with fury, Elena's were gray and cautious. "You knew her well?" he asked. Elena nodded. "She was older than me by 2 years. Always laughing, always kind. Everyone loved her, especially Alrin." "The betrothed?" She looked away. "Yes." Geralt let the silence stretch, then said, "Tell me what happened that day." Elena clasped her hands tightly. It was the day of the harvest feast. Maritka was to wed Alrin in the chapel by the stream. She went early to gather flowers for her wreath. When the bells rang, she didn't come. We searched and found her lying in the rye, her throat cut. Alrin was mad with grief. He swore he'd find whoever did it, but 3 nights later he was found dead too. His skin burned, they said. Did anyone see him before he died? No, he'd locked himself in his barn, said the spirit of his bride haunted him. The villagers found him after dawn. Geralt considered this. Strange that a Noonwraith should return only now. A year's a long time. Elena shivered. Some say the fields were blessed last summer. A priest came through, sprinkled holy water. Maybe it kept her away until now. Maybe, Geralt said, though he doubted it. Blessings rarely held when the truth was buried beneath lies. Elena hesitated, glancing toward the fields. Can she be freed? Truly freed? If I can find what binds her, yes. She nodded, though her lips trembled slightly. Then I'll help however I can. Maritka deserves peace. Geralt inclined his head. Meet me by the alderman's house before sunset. Bring whatever belonged to her, a keepsake, jewelry, anything she wore on her last day. Elena left quickly, her figure soon swallowed by the tall grain. Geralt watched her go, unease stirring in his gut. He'd hunted enough ghosts to know when a living soul carried heavier secrets than the dead. As the day wore on, Geralt prepared. He brewed a fresh dose of spectre oil, mixing the potion in slow, practiced motions until it shimmered like mercury. He checked the moondust bombs and drank a swallow of Petrie's filter, the potion sharpening his senses to a razor's edge. The world grew sharper, the hum of flies, the rustle of stalks, even the heartbeat of a distant sparrow. When the sun dipped low, he returned to the alderman's house. Toden waited outside with Elena, who held a small box wrapped in linen. Her hands trembled. This was hers, she whispered, a comb of carved bone. She used it every morning. Geralt took it gently. The surface was cracked, but strands of pale hair still clung between the teeth, a strong link to the spirit. Good, he said, now go home. Stay inside after sundown. But no arguments. The Witcher turned and strode toward the fields. Dusk thickened, painting the sky in bruised hues of violet and red. He reached the scorched ring of earth and placed the comb at its center. Then he drew a circle around it in salt, marking runes of protection at each quarter. The first stars appeared, Crickets sang. The wind fell silent. Geralt murmured a final incantation and pressed his palm to the ground. The earth shuddered. From the shadows of the rye, a shape began to form, tall, slender, and shining faintly with the light of the dying sun. Maritka. Her face was beautiful still, though her eyes burned like coals, and her mouth twisted in eternal grief. She hovered above the soil, her veil trailing behind her like smoke. "Alrin," she whispered, the word thin as breath. Geralt's hand tightened on his sword. "Maritka of Holmwick, hear me. You are bound to this place by deceit. Tell me who wronged you." The spirit's gaze snapped toward him. Her voice became a shriek. "Lies! All lies!" The wind roared, flattening the rye. Geralt leapt aside as the wraith lunged, claws of light slashing through the air. He swung his sword, silver flashing. The blade met her form with a hiss, scattering fragments of light. But she reformed, screaming in fury. "Irden!" he shouted, driving his sign into the earth. A circle of violet energy flared. The wraith recoiled. Her movements slowed. Within the ring, Geralt pressed the attack, quick, measured strikes, each one cutting through her mist-like body. She wailed, the sound piercing the night. Then, just as he raised his blade for the final blow, her form wavered and dissolved, vanishing into the wind. Geralt stood alone, breathing hard. The circle faded. The comb at his feet had turned to ash, not destroyed, merely driven away. The curse still held. He sheathed his sword slowly. Somewhere behind him, a door creaked. A figure stood at the edge of the field. Elena, her face pale in the moonlight. "You shouldn't be here," Geralt said quietly. I had to see." Her voice trembled. "Did you free her?" "Not yet." She bit her lip, tears glinting in her eyes. "Then she's still suffering." Geralt studied her for a long moment. "You're hiding something. If you want her freed, tell me the truth." Elena's face went still. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "I'll tell you everything tomorrow." She turned and fled toward the village. Geralt watched her disappear into the mist. The wind rustled through the rye again, whispering softly like a sigh. He looked down at the circle of scorched earth and muttered under his breath, "Tomorrow, then. But ghosts don't wait." And somewhere unseen, laughter echoed faintly through the night, bright, girlish, and cruel. The night was long and restless. Holmwick lay quiet beneath a silvered sky, yet sleep came to none. Dogs barked without reason. A chill wind swept through the rye, bending the stalks as though something moved unseen among them. Geralt sat awake in the inn's common room, sharpening his sword again, though the blade needed no honing. The rhythmic scrape kept his mind steady. The air inside smelled of smoke, ale, and unease. He thought of the wraith's voice, the raw grief in her scream, the venom when she spoke of lies. Noonwraiths did not lie themselves. They repeated the truths that killed them. Somewhere in those words hid the key to her release. Before dawn, Geralt rose and walked out. The moon still hung low above the fields, pale as milk. Mist coiled across the ground, clinging to his boots as he made his way toward the willow by the shrine. Crows stirred from the branches, cawing hoarsely into the silence. The parchment he'd found there yesterday was gone. Someone had taken it in the night. He crouched, examined the ground. Fresh footprints, small bare feet, led toward the stream. A faint trail vanishing among the reeds. He followed it. At the water's edge, he found something half buried in mud. A silver locket, its clasp broken. Inside was a miniature portrait, faded, but clear enough to see two girls standing arm in arm, Maritka and Alina, both smiling, unaware of the years that would turn one into a ghost and the other into a trembling shadow. He slipped the locket into his pouch and rose. The first light of dawn painted the clouds, pink and gold. Behind him, the village began to stir, doors opening, smoke rising from chimneys. By the time he returned, the alderman was already waiting at the well, his eyes ringed with fatigue. "Witcher," he said, voice heavy. "Folk are frightened. After what happened last night, they want to leave the fields untouched. But the harvest, if we don't gather it soon, we'll starve come winter." Geralt leaned against the fence. "You won't gather anything until the curse is broken. Go into those fields now and you'll lose more than grain." Todin rubbed his face. "Then for the god's sake, do what you must. Helena said she spoke with you, said she'd help. She promised to tell me the truth," Geralt said. "If she keeps that promise, I'll finish this." The alderman looked down, unease flickering in his eyes. "Be careful with that one, Witcher. Grief changes people. She's not been the same since her sister died. Stares at nothing, talks to the air. Some say she goes to the fields at noon, though none have dared follow." Geralt's gaze hardened. "If she's been walking there, that explains why the wraith returned." He turned without another word and headed toward Alina's cottage. It stood apart from the others, a small place surrounded by withered flowers. Smoke rose faintly from the chimney. He knocked once, then pushed the door open. Helena sat at a table, her hands clasped before her, a half-burnt candle flickering in front of her face. She did not look up. "I knew you'd come," she said softly. "Then tell me," Geralt said, closing the door behind him. "Tell me what really happened that day." For a moment she was silent. Then, slowly, she began to speak. "Maritka was beautiful," she said, her voice distant. "Everyone adored her. I didn't begrudge her that, not at first. But then Alrin came. He was handsome, strong, and kind. He chose her, of course. He never saw me, never once. But I loved him, Witcher. Loved him so much it burned. And when he told me they were to wed, I thought I would die." Geralt said nothing. "One day, not long before the wedding, I overheard him speaking with another girl in the village, Yarka, the miller's daughter. They were laughing, whispering. I told Maritka what I'd seen, thinking to warn her, but she only smiled and said I was jealous." Her eyes darkened. "And perhaps I was." She looked down at her hands. "The morning of the wedding, I went to her house. I wanted to wish her happiness. Truly, I did. But we quarreled. Words became shouts. She said I'd always been small and bitter, that no man could love someone with such a heart. And I struck her. Only once. She fell, hit her head on a stone. There was so much blood. Too much." Geralt's expression did not change. "And Alrin?" "I told him I found her like that," Alina whispered. "He didn't believe me. He went mad with grief. The next day he swore to find her killer. And 3 nights later, he was dead. Burnt by the sun, they said. But I knew the truth even before the wraith returned. She came to me first, you see. Every night, she stands by my bed and asks me to speak, to confess. But I can't. Her voice broke. Tears fell onto the table. Geralt waited until she quieted. "You can, Alina. And you will, because until the truth is spoken, your sister will never rest. She'll haunt this village until it's nothing but ashes." Alina shook her head. "You don't understand. If I confess, they'll hang me. Better you hang than a dozen die. She stared at him, trembling. What must I do? Meet me at the field when the sun stands highest. Bring the veil she wore that day. When she comes, you'll speak her name and tell her the truth. That's the only way to break the bond. Elena closed her eyes. I'll do it. Geralt nodded once, then turned to leave. As he stepped outside, the first rays of the sun crept over the horizon, staining the sky gold. He felt the faint pull of magic stirring in the rye. The wraith sensed what was coming. Spirits always did. He spent the next hours preparing. He coated his silver blade with fresh oil and fixed charms to his belt. Noon approached swiftly, the air thickening with heat. From the village came distant voices, men calling their children indoors, doors bolted shut, shutters drawn. Holmwick braced for what was to come. Geralt stood at the edge of the field, eyes on the horizon. The air shimmered, heavy and bright. Then Elena appeared, her white dress clinging to her, as though it feared the sun. In her hand she carried a veil, pale and blood-stained. Remember, Geralt said quietly, when she appears, don't run. Speak her name, then the truth. Don't stop until it's done. Elena nodded weakly. Sweat glistened on her brow. The sun reached its zenith. The air seemed to hum. From the heart of the field, the rye began to stir, though no wind blew. The stalks bent outward, forming a path of flattened gold. A shape drifted along it, glowing with fierce white light. Maritka. Her face was serene now, almost human, but her eyes burned with sorrow older than death. She moved closer, her feet not touching the ground. Elena? The voice was soft, tender. Sister, why do you hide? Elena trembled, clutching the veil. Maritka, forgive me. The wraith's smile faded. Forgive? For what? For your death, Elena choked out. I never meant it, I swear. It was an accident. I was angry, jealous, but I didn't mean to kill you. The spirit's light flared. The rye hissed and bent. Geralt stepped forward, sword raised, ready if the confession failed. You struck me, Maritka whispered, and you let them say it was Ulrin. You let him die. Elena fell to her knees. I was afraid. I couldn't. The wraith screamed. The sound ripped through the air like shattering glass. Geralt thrust his hand forward, casting Iriden. The circle blazed violet, trapping her inside. Elena, finish it, he shouted. Tell her everything. I loved him, she cried. I wanted him for myself. I lied. I lied about Yarka. I lied about everything. Please, sister, end it. End this. The light grew blinding. Maritka's scream rose once more, then broke into sobs. Her form flickered, dissolving into golden motes that drifted upward, shimmering in the sunlight like dust. When the glow faded, the field stood still. The rye swayed gently under a soft wind. The Noonwraith was gone. Geralt lowered his sword. Elena knelt in the dirt, face buried in her hands, weeping silently. It's over, he said. She looked up, eyes hollow. Is it? She's gone, but so is everything else. Geralt said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Behind them, the village bells began to ring. Not for celebration, no, for judgment. The villagers would come soon, carrying ropes and torches. Holmwick's peace would not be won cheaply. Geralt turned toward the road. You'll have to face them. Elena nodded faintly. I know. He left her there among the rye, the sunlight glinting off his blade as he walked. The curse was broken. The dead had been freed. Yet in his heart the Witcher felt only the weight of another truth, that men, not monsters, cast the darkest shadows of all. The bells of Holmwick tolled through the hot afternoon, slow and heavy as judgment. Geralt stood at the edge of the village, watching as the peasants gathered, They came in silence. Men with grim faces, women clutching their children close. All eyes turned toward the narrow path that led from the rye fields, where Alina walked alone. Her white dress was smeared with earth and blood, her hair unbound, her steps slow. Two of the elder men moved forward to meet her. They did not speak, nor did she resist when they took her by the arms and led her toward the well in the center of the square. The alderman Todin waited there, with a noose slung across his shoulder. Geralt remained apart, leaning against the fence near the tavern. He had seen scenes like this before, too many times. The end of a curse rarely brought peace. It only revealed the wounds that time and guilt had hidden. She confessed, one of the villagers muttered, his voice trembling with both fear and relief. The Witcher heard it himself. She killed her own blood. Another spat on the ground. Let the gods judge her, then. Todin raised a hand for silence. Alina of Holmwick, he said, his voice rough, you've spoken the truth before witness. Your own tongue has damned you. You brought death to your kin and ruin to our fields. What say you before the gods? Alina looked up. Her eyes were red, yet strangely calm. I say that I loved and envied in equal measure. I say that the sun burns hotter for those who sin and live than for those who die clean. Do what you must. No one moved for a moment. Then the alderman nodded to the men beside her. They looped the rope around her neck, fixed it to the beam above the well, and stepped back. The crowd watched in silence. A woman began to weep quietly. Geralt turned away before the rope tightened. He walked toward Roach, who waited tethered by the road. Behind him came the dull creak of wood, a gasp, and then only the faint rustle of the rye beyond the fields. The Witcher mounted his horse and sat for a moment, letting the reins hang loose. The air smelled of dust and smoke. He thought of Maritka's spirit dissolving into light, her laughter turned to ash, and of Alina's final, resigned words. Some curses demanded blood before they would sleep. This had been one of them. He guided Roach toward the main road. Todin hurried after him, panting, a small purse of coins in his hand. Witcher, he called, wait, your pay as promised. Geralt took the purse without counting. Keep your people out of the fields until the next full moon. Burn what's left of the Vale, scatter the ashes to the stream. Todin nodded eagerly. Aye, we will. And thank you. You've saved us, Witcher. Geralt said nothing. He spurred Roach forward. The horse's hooves struck the hard earth with slow, steady beats, carrying him away from Holmwick and its ghosts. For a time, he rode without thought. The landscape rolled by in waves of gold and green, the air thick with the hum of insects. A hawk circled high above, its cry sharp and distant. But beneath the peace of the countryside lingered a heaviness that no sunlight could banish. As evening drew near, Geralt reached a crossroads where a shrine stood among the trees. He dismounted, fed Roach an apple, and sat upon a stone to rest. A narrow stream trickled nearby, its surface glinting with reflected light. He unstoppered his waterskin and drank. He was about to rise when he noticed movement at the edge of the trees. A young boy stepped out. A peasant lad, no older than 10, barefoot and thin. He held something wrapped in cloth against his chest. Witcher, the boy said timidly. My Da sent me, said you should have this. Geralt frowned. What is it? The boy handed him the bundle. Inside lay a wooden token carved roughly in the shape of a sunburst. It was blackened around the edges, as though scorched. My Da says it's from the field, the boy continued. They found it where the ghost vanished. Said it weren't there before. Maybe it's Witcher stuff. Geralt turned the charm over in his palm. The symbol was old, older than Holmwick, older than Temeria itself. He traced the edges with his thumb, a sigil of protection meant to ward against restless spirits. But this one had been tampered with. The lines were wrong, twisted subtly to reverse their meaning. A ward turned trap. He looked up sharply. Who's your father? Jakub, the smith. Geralt stood. Tell him to keep this quiet. And tell your alderman not to touch anything found in that field again. The boy nodded quickly and ran off into the trees. Geralt watched him go, unease gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. The curse was broken, yes, but the magic that had birthed it might not have come from sorrow alone. Someone had shaped it, anchored it with that charm. Alina had killed her sister, but someone else had ensured that the Wraith would rise and torment Holmwick for a year. He tucked the token into a pouch, mounted Roach, and turned back toward the village. The sun was sinking, setting the sky aflame with crimson. The shadows stretched long over the road, and the wind carried the faint scent of burnt straw. When he reached Holmwick again, the square was empty save for the alderman who stood by the well staring at the hanging rope, swaying gently in the evening breeze. The body had been cut down, a dark stain marking the ground. Geralt dismounted and tossed the charm to him. Where did this come from? Todin caught it, blinking. Never seen it before. It was in your fields. Someone used it to bind the Noonwraith here. It wasn't just Alina's guilt that kept her sister's spirit from resting. The alderman turned pale. Then who? That's what I'd like to know, Geralt said. You said a priest came last summer to bless the crops. What was his name? Todin frowned, searching his memory. Father Marthin, I think. From the border village of Gorsewatch. He came, stayed 2 nights, then left before dawn. Never saw him since. Geralt's eyes narrowed. And after he left, the hauntings began. The alderman nodded slowly. You think he did this? I think he wasn't a priest. Geralt took the charm back. Men who meddle in old magic often wear borrowed faces. If he's still in these lands, he'll try again, and if he does, others will die. He turned toward the road once more. If strangers come claiming to bless your fields, send word to the nearest watchtower. Tell them to call for a witcher. Todin bowed his head. We'll do as you say. Will you hunt him? Geralt mounted Roach and adjusted the reins. If I cross his path. He rode out of Holmwick as the last light faded. Behind him the village grew small against the horizon, its smoke curling into the darkening sky. The rye fields shimmered one final time in the dusk. Peaceful now, their whispers stilled. The road stretched ahead, winding toward the border hills. Geralt touched the pouch at his belt where the scorched token lay. It pulsed faintly with residual magic, a promise that the tale of Holmwick was not yet finished. Night descended. The first stars pierced the deep blue sky. Roach's hooves beat a steady rhythm on the hard earth. The Witcher rode on, alone with his thoughts, the scent of rye still clinging to his cloak. Behind him, unseen by any living soul, a figure stirred in the fields. Cloaked and hooded, it watched the Witcher's departing shape until it vanished beyond the hills. Then it knelt, pressed a gloved hand to the scorched soil, and whispered a prayer, not to the gods, but to something far older, darker, and patient. The wind rose again, carrying with it the faint echo of a woman's laughter, soft, mournful, and unfinished. The next day broke under a low and sullen sky. Clouds gathered over the hills like bruises, and the air carried the heavy scent of rain. Geralt rode west along the rutted road, the horizon lost in mist. Holmwick was now far behind him, though its memory clung like smoke. He had hoped the trail of the false priest would fade with distance, but his instincts told him otherwise. A curse born of deceit did not end easily. By midday he reached the hamlet of Gorswatch, a place smaller and poorer than Holmwick, set beside a half-dried riverbed. The few huts that stood there leaned as though tired of living, and the fields beyond were barren, as if something had drunk all life from the soil. Crows perched on the fences, silent and watchful. Geralt dismounted before the only tavern, a lopsided shack with a crooked sign. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of beer and damp straw. A few locals sat hunched over mugs, their faces gaunt. The innkeeper, a thin man with eyes too sharp for his own good, looked up from behind the counter. "Traveler?" he said cautiously. "Witcher," Geralt answered, shaking the rain from his cloak. The words spread through the room like a spark in dry grass. The peasants muttered, glanced at one another, and quickly found reasons to leave. Within moments, only the innkeeper remained. "Never had one of your kind here," he said slowly. "We've no monsters left worth your time." Geralt tossed a coin on the counter. "I'm looking for a priest. Came through here last summer. Name of Marthen." The innkeeper hesitated, his fingers hovering over the coin. I remember him." Tall fellow, black beard, carried a silver staff. Said he served the eternal fire, preached a bit, blessed the wells, took what coin folk could spare, left after 2 days. Where did he go? South, toward the river ford, though some say he never crossed it. One of the lads found his staff by the bank a week later, cracked clean in half. Geralt's eyes narrowed. "Anyone see him since?" The man shook his head. "No, but strange things started after he left. Calves born with white eyes, fields gone sour, and last month 2 children vanished by the woods. Their tracks ended in the mud as if the earth swallowed them whole." Geralt took the coin back and turned toward the door. "If that priest returns, bar your doors and pray he keeps walking." Outside, the rain had begun to fall, thin, cold needles that soaked through his cloak. He mounted Roach and rode south, following the river's winding course. By dusk, the storm thickened. The road turned to mire beneath his boots, and lightning flickered behind the distant hills. Near the ford, he found the remains of an old chapel. Its roof had collapsed, and ivy crawled through the shattered windows. The stone altar inside was cracked, the carvings worn to near nothing. Yet beneath the ruin, Geralt felt the thrum of lingering power, a pulse too deliberate to be chance. He dismounted, tied Roach under a leaning oak, and drew his sword. The air around the chapel was wrong, still heavy, watching. He crossed the threshold. Inside, the shadows were thick. The last light of day bled through the broken roof in pale stripes. Geralt moved silently between the fallen pews, the Witcher medallion at his throat vibrating faintly. There was something here, something waiting. A faint scrape echoed from behind the altar. He turned sharply, sword raised. From the gloom stepped a figure in tattered robes, the remnants of priestly garb. The man's beard was matted, his skin grayish, and his eyes burned with feverish light. "So," the figure said, voice hoarse, "they send the White Wolf at last. I wondered how long before the path brought you. Geralt kept his distance. Marthen? The man laughed, a sound like stones grinding. That name's a relic, Witcher. I shed it along with the fire's lies. I found truer power beneath these fields, sleeping in the bones of the world. Geralt's grip tightened. You bound a spirit in Holmwick. Used the grief of a murdered girl to feed your magic. Marthen spread his arms, and it worked. Her rage sustained the soil, made the crops flourish. The peasants begged for blessings, and I gave them what they wanted. A harvest for a life, an old bargain, older than any temple. You turned their sorrow into a curse. The false priest smiled thinly. You call it a curse, I call it balance. What is one girl's torment to feed 100 mouths? Geralt stepped closer, his boots crunching on fallen stone. You're a necromancer, a student of life's deeper roots, Marthen said softly. And I could teach you, Witcher. You of all men should understand. You were made to kill monsters. But what if you could command them instead? The offer hung in the air like poison. Geralt said nothing, only moved his fingers subtly, tracing the sign of Quen. The faint shimmer of a protective shield flickered around him. I'll pass, he said flatly. The necromancer sighed. Then die as you've lived, blind to what could have been. He raised his hands. The ground beneath the chapel heaved. From the cracks burst a swarm of corpses, half-rotted shapes bound by tendrils of red light. Their eyes glowed faintly, their mouths opening in voiceless moans. Geralt moved. His sword sang through the damp air, silver flashing as it cleaved through the first corpse's neck. The body collapsed in a heap, but two more lunged in its place. He rolled aside, slashed low, then cast Igni. Fire roared from his hand, engulfing the dead in searing flame. The stench of burnt flesh filled the chapel. Marthen snarled and hurled a spell. Bolts of crimson light struck the floor where Geralt had stood a moment before, shattering the stone. Dust and ash swirled. Geralt leapt onto the altar, driving forward through the haze. His blade met the necromancer's staff with a flash of sparks. You can't kill me, Marthen hissed. The land itself answers to me now. Geralt shoved him back, then slashed again, cutting deep into the man's arm. Black blood hissed where it touched the floor. I've killed worse, Geralt said coldly. The necromancer stumbled, clutching his wound. You think this ends me? You've severed only one root of a greater tree. His voice dropped to a whisper. The Harvest King wakes, Witcher. When he rises, all fields will drink their fill. Before Geralt could strike again, Marthen pressed a bloodied hand to his chest and muttered a word of power. His body collapsed into dust, scattering on the wind like ash. Silence followed. Only the rain drummed on the ruined roof. Geralt stood still for a long time, his sword lowered, eyes fixed on the place where the necromancer had stood. Then he sheathed his blade and knelt, brushing the dust aside. Beneath it lay another charm, carved with the same twisted sigil as before. He picked it up, studying the faint red glow pulsing from its center. The magic was fading, but not gone. Whatever Marthen had served, or awakened, was not finished. Outside, the rain had eased to a drizzle. Geralt mounted Roach and turned north once more. Behind him, the chapel collapsed inward with a groan, swallowed by the earth. The Witcher did not look back. He rode through the wet fields until night fell, the sigil still throbbing faintly in his pouch. Far away, thunder rolled over the hills, and in its echoes, he thought he heard again the whisper of the rye, soft, mournful, and restless, as though something vast stirred beneath the soil, dreaming of the next harvest to come. The storm rolled across the land for 3 days. It washed the roads to rivers and the skies to iron, and all along the Temerian border the air smelled of rain and rot. Geralt kept to the road, hood drawn, Roach trudging through the mire with weary patience. Each mile carried them farther from the chapel's ruin, but not from the memory of what had transpired there. The necromancer's words echoed like a stubborn ghost in the Witcher's mind. The Harvest King wakes. He had heard that name before long ago, spoken by an old sorceress half mad from time and solitude. A spirit of plenty, she'd called it. A god of fields and growth who fed not on prayers, but on sacrifice. Once worshipped in these lands, long before the eternal fire burned its creed into every town square. A god that slept beneath the soil, dreaming in seed and blood. Geralt did not believe in gods, but he believed in monsters. And sometimes the difference between the two was measured only in the number of those who knelt before them. By the morning of the 4th day, the storm broke. A pale sun rose over a world scrubbed clean and shining. The Witcher stopped at a crossroads where an old woman sold bread and onions beneath a tarred awning. She eyed him with the wary curiosity reserved for those who carried swords longer than sense. "Road's clear to the west," she said, handing him a hunk of bread, "though they say a sickness has touched the hamlet of Bramble Hollow. Crops blackened overnight, and those who worked the fields now lie fevered. You'd best steer clear." Geralt paid her double and asked, "Did a stranger pass that way recently? A man in priest's robes, perhaps?" Her eyes darted to the woods. "Aye, came through 2 nights past, limping. Didn't speak, just bought a loaf and kept walking east. Left this." She reached under her stall and produced a piece of wood carved with the same twisted sunburst symbol. Geralt took it carefully, feeling the pulse of residual magic beneath its surface. "Did he say anything?" The woman shook her head. "Only that the fields would bloom again soon. I thought him mad." Geralt nodded once. "You were right." He rode on without finishing the bread. The trail led him to Bramble Hollow by dusk. The hamlet lay shrouded in a gray haze, the air thick with the smell of decay. What should have been golden wheat now stood black and brittle as though the stalks had drunk poison. The silence was worse than the smell. No voices, no birds, not even the buzz of flies. Geralt dismounted and walked among the huts. Doors hung open. Inside one, he found a family huddled together, their faces pale, eyes sunken. They were alive but barely breathing, fever slick and murmuring in their sleep. Words in an ancient tongue passed their lips. Fragments of prayer twisted by delirium. He left them as they were and followed the signs of corruption to the village square. There in the center, the well had been filled with grain, sodden, blackened kernels piled high and stinking of mildew. Among the husks stood a wooden effigy, a man's form bound in straw and reeds, crowned with a ring of wheat. Beneath it, a brazier still smoldered, giving off faint trails of red smoke. Geralt's medallion vibrated sharply. The air shimmered with the residue of blood magic. He drew his sword. The sound of soft laughter drifted through the haze. "You're persistent, Witcher," came a voice from behind him. He turned. The man who had called himself Father Marthin stood at the edge of the square. Robe torn, one eye clouded white. The wound on his arm had not healed. Instead, the veins around it glowed faintly crimson, pulsing with unnatural life. "You should have stayed in your ruined chapel," Geralt said. "And miss the harvest?" Marthen smiled thinly. "No, the soil is ready now. The seed is sown. Soon the king will wake, and all these empty mouths will feast." "By turning villages into graveyards?" Marthen's expression twisted into something almost tender. "Life feeds on death, Witcher. Every blade of grass grows from rot. The peasants pray for bounty, yet they curse the hand that grants it. Hypocrites. I merely gave them what they desired." Geralt advanced a step. "You're feeding something else entirely. Something that'll eat you too." "Perhaps," the necromancer said calmly, "but I will be the first to taste its favor." He spread his arms, and the effigy behind him ignited with a roar. The red smoke thickened, coiling upward like a living serpent. Geralt moved swiftly, casting Quen as a wave of searing heat burst from the flames. The ground cracked, and from beneath the well burst roots, as thick as a man's arm, roots pulsing with blood. They writhed, clutching at the Witcher's legs. Geralt swung his sword, severing them, the silver blade sizzling where it met the unnatural sap. He leapt forward, cutting through another tendril, then cast Igni. Fire spread through the roots, filling the air with smoke and the stench of burning soil. But Marthen did not flinch. He chanted in the old tongue, voice rising above the storm of crackling flame. The smoke gathered around him, shaping itself into a towering figure, horned, faceless, crowned with burning grain. The Harvest King. Geralt knew better than to fight gods, even false ones. He aimed for the source. He hurled a moondust bomb. The explosion tore through the air, scattering silver sparks that bit into the necromancer's flesh. Marthen screamed, staggering backward as the spectral figure flickered and faltered. Geralt charged, blade flashing. He struck once, twice, the second blow biting deep into Marthen's chest. The necromancer fell to his knees, blood pouring black and thick. He looked up, eyes burning with fanatic light. "Too late," he rasped. "The seed's taken root." He laughed once, a ragged, terrible sound, and collapsed. His body withered to ash before it touched the ground. The effigy burned to nothing. The smoke thinned. The roots shriveled, retreating into the soil with a hiss. Silence returned to Bramble Hollow. Geralt stood among the ashes, breathing hard. Rain began to fall again, soft and cold, washing the black from the earth. The Witcher cleaned his blade, sheathed it, and walked to the edge of the field. The soil there was dark, rich, and warm beneath his hand, as though something still pulsed beneath the surface. He did not linger. Some evils, he knew, could not be slain in a single battle. They waited, they grew, and they woke again when the world forgot their names. By dawn, he was far from Bramble Hollow. The road wound through hills, now washed green by the rain, and birds sang once more. Yet when he looked back, he thought he saw, far on the horizon, a faint column of smoke, still rising where the village had stood, thin, red, and steady as a heartbeat. Geralt turned his eyes forward and rode on. The path never ended. It merely bent and curved, leading him from one shadow into the next. And somewhere, deep beneath the earth, the Harvest King dreamed of summer yet to come. The path wound south toward the forests of Sodden, where the trees grew thick and close. Their branches knotted like clenched fists against the sky. The air was damp and cool beneath their canopy, filled with the quiet hiss of leaves and the scent of moss. Geralt rode without hurry, his cloak still stained with the smoke of Bramble Hollow, his mind heavy with what he had seen there. He had slain a necromancer, yes, But his instincts told him that was no victory. Marthin's words had lingered, the seeds taken root. Such things were not boasts, they were warnings. Magic of that kind, once sown, spread like plague through soil and soul alike. A single act of blood could anchor a curse that would outlast generations. Geralt had seen it before, in Velen, in Caedwin, in a dozen nameless villages swallowed by their own superstition and greed. He guided Roach along the forest road until dusk bled across the treetops. When the first wolves began to howl, he found a clearing by an abandoned mill and made camp. He kindled a small fire, laid out dried meat and bread, and sat in silence while the flames cracked. The medallion at his throat was still, yet his thoughts were restless. Somewhere nearby a nightjar called once, twice, and then fell silent. Geralt's hand moved to his sword hilt. A faint rustle echoed from the brush beyond the firelight. He waited, still as stone. Moments later, a figure stepped from the shadows. A woman? She was cloaked in dark green, her hair long and red as autumn leaves. Her face was sharp and pale, her eyes bright and unreadable. Not a peasant's face, nor a sorceress's exactly, but something between. She stopped a few paces away and inclined her head. "You keep watch like a wolf," she said softly, "even when no danger prowls." "Habit," Geralt replied. "And you are?" "Liren," she said, "druid of Brockalorn. The forest whispered of your passing." Geralt nodded slightly. "Then you know why I'm here?" "Perhaps," she said, moving closer to the fire. "The land speaks when blood stains it. The fields to the north scream in their sleep. You fought a servant of the old gods. Servant's one word for it." Liren crouched by the flames, her eyes reflecting the light. "You've disturbed something older than either of us, Witcher. The Harvest King was not a god in the way peasants pray to. He was the pulse of the soil itself, life and death entwined. When men ceased their offerings, he slept. But those who still remembered the rites, they could wake fragments of him, feed them with fear, with guilt, with blood. Marthin called him a god, Geralt said he'd return, and he will," Liren murmured, "not as flesh, but as hunger. Wherever the soil remembers his name, the rot will spread. You cannot kill hunger, Witcher. You can only starve it." Geralt studied her. "Then tell me how." Liren met his gaze. "The curse grows through roots and water. The river that runs past Bramble Hollow feeds half this land. If you would stop the rot, you must find where the river's heart begins. There lies the source, the shrine of the first furrow. Burn it, and the hunger will lose its body." "Where?" "In the marshes beyond Sodden," she said. "Few dare walk there now. The air itself poisons, and the water hides more than fish." Geralt stood, tightening his cloak. "Then that's where I'll go." Liren rose as well. "Take care, Witcher. The old powers do not die. They wait, and when the soil calls, even the dead may answer." She turned and vanished into the trees without sound, leaving only the faint scent of pine and rain. Geralt watched the shadows a moment longer, then sat again. He poured the last of his ale into the fire, listened to it hiss, and murmured under his breath, "The marshes, then." By dawn he was already riding. The forest thinned into rolling meadows, where mist clung low to the ground. Villages became fewer, and those he passed seemed hollowed out, their fields barren, their wells covered. Fear traveled faster than plague. By midday the sky turned gray once more, and the scent of rot grew strong. The road ended at a stretch of bogland that spread as far as the eye could see, water and reed and mist. The croak of frogs was the only sound. He left Roach tethered to a lone willow and pressed on by foot. The mud sucked at his boots and the air was thick with insects. Strange shapes loomed through the fog, half-sunken stones carved with forgotten runes and bones of animals long dead. He moved carefully, hand on his hilt. The deeper he went, the louder the whispers grew. Not voices, but the sigh of wind through reeds that almost formed words. The medallion trembled faintly. Magic, old, tangled, and hungry. Hours passed. The mist thickened until the world shrank to a circle of gray around him. Then he saw it, a mound rising from the water, crowned by standing stones. At its center stood an altar of black granite, streaked with veins of gold, the shrine of the first furrow. Geralt approached, boots sinking into the mud. The air was colder here, the stillness oppressive. He could feel the thrum of power beneath his feet, a slow, steady heartbeat in the earth. Upon the altar lay offerings long turned to decay, bones, shards of pottery, the shriveled remains of grain. Yet something new gleamed among them, a fresh token carved with a sigil of the Harvest King. Its edges were slick with blood. He touched it with the tip of his sword, and the ground trembled. The mud around the mound began to bubble. Figures rose from it, half-formed, their skin like bark, eyes hollow pits filled with light. Field spirits, protectors once, now corrupted into guardians of the rot. Geralt drew his silver blade, the runes along its edge glowing faintly. The creatures circled, their mouths whispering fragments of prayer. The first lunged. He met it with a clean strike that split it from shoulder to chest. It fell, dissolving into black water. Another came faster. He sidestepped, slashed low, and sent it sprawling. They came in waves, silent but relentless. He fought with precision, conserving motion and breath. When the last one fell, the earth shuddered again. The altar cracked, spilling a dark fluid that hissed where it touched the air. A voice rose from the ground, deep and slow, a whisper that seemed to come from every grain of soil. Witcher, you reap what you sow. Geralt planted a moon dust bomb upon the altar and stepped back. The explosion tore through the air, white fire engulfing the mound. The stones toppled, the shrine crumbled, and the voice fell silent. The mist began to lift. For the first time in days he could see the sky, a pale wash of blue above the reeds. The air smelled cleaner. Geralt wiped his blade clean and turned back toward the forest. He would return to Brocalorn to tell Lorraine the shrine was ash. Perhaps the hunger would sleep again, for a time. As he reached the edge of the bog, a faint sound drifted from behind him, the soft rustle of stalks in the wind, like a field of rye swaying though no wind blew. He did not look back. Some songs, he knew, were meant only for the dead to hear. The forest received him again, silent and dripping after the bog's retreat. The sun hung low between the boughs, a pale, cold light that cast long bars across the path. Geralt rode in silence, Roach's hooves muffled by wet earth. The air smelled of pine and smoke, smoke not of campfires, but of villages burned clean. Somewhere ahead, the land was sick again. By nightfall, he reached the edge of a wide clearing. The remains of a settlement sprawled there, charred beams, collapsed roofs, and fields that glimmered faintly red in the moonlight. A strange hush lay over everything. Geralt dismounted and crouched beside a blackened post. It was warm to the touch. Recent. Whatever had happened here was no more than a day past. He found bodies in the ash. Men, women, a few children. Their faces bore no signs of struggle, only a calm that felt unnatural. A faint residue of magic lingered in the air, familiar, bitter as iron. The Harvest King's touch. He straightened and looked toward the heart of the ruins. There, beside what had once been a granary, a single figure knelt in the dust. A woman in a torn robe, hair pale as straw, eyes closed in prayer. Her lips moved, though no sound came. When Geralt approached, she turned, and he saw that her eyes were burned white. "Another pilgrim," she whispered, "come to see the king reborn." Geralt's hand went to his sword. "You're too late for that. The shrine's destroyed." The woman smiled faintly. "Destroyed? Foolish hunter. You can burn the altar, but the seed remains. It takes root in flesh as well as earth." She pressed a hand to her breast. Beneath the skin, something pulsed, something that glowed faintly through her ribs. Geralt drew his sword. "Step away from the dead." "Why should I? They are his now. All who fed upon his fields belong to him." Her voice deepened, warped by something that was not wholly human. "And soon, Witcher, so shall you." She rose, movements jerky, her limbs bending wrong. Her mouth opened in a scream that was not hers. From her chest burst a coil of crimson light, twisting upward into a shape that almost had a face. The Harvest King's fragment, seeking a new vessel. Geralt muttered a curse and cast Quen. The protective sign flared as the red light struck, bursting against it like flame against glass. He slashed once, twice, the silver blade humming through the air. The woman's body fell, but the light lingered, swirling above her like smoke. It lunged again, coiling around his arm. The pain was immediate and sharp, cold burning through his veins. He gritted his teeth, dropped his sword, and pressed his hand to the ground. "Igna," he snarled. The sign of fire roared to life. The blaze swept through the ruin, devouring the red light, searing away the last traces of the curse. When it was done, nothing remained but ash. Geralt stood, breathing hard, his arm scorched, but his heart steady. The medallion still trembled. The curse was fading, but not gone. The necromancer's final words came back again, the seeds taken root. He looked at the body. The woman's face was peaceful once more. Her eyes closed as if in sleep. Around her neck hung a chain of bone and silver. He took it up carefully. The charm was carved in the shape of a sheaf of wheat, its edges blackened. "Druid work," he murmured. He pocketed it and turned to leave, but the sound of hooves stopped him. From the dark edge of the trees rode two figures cloaked in blue-gray. Witch hunters. The sigil of the eternal fire gleamed upon their breastplates. "By the light!" the first exclaimed, raising a torch. "Another sorcerer's work." His eyes narrowed at Geralt.
"And you, mutant, what devilry do you consort with here?" Geralt sighed inwardly. "The usual kind? Dead cultist, burned curse, nothing left for you to meddle in." The second hunter dismounted, inspecting the ashes. "Looks like blasphemy to me. Maybe you burned your accomplices to hide the evidence." Geralt's tone stayed calm. "You're free to search the ruins. You'll find only the dead. And if you're wise, you'll leave before night falls. The ground's still poisoned." The first hunter sneered. "You think to warn servants of the fire? We burn poison." He raised his hand, torch flaring. Geralt moved before he could speak another word. A flick of the wrist, a push of air. The sign of Ard struck him squarely, hurling him backward into the mud. The second hunter reached for his sword, but Geralt was already beside him, one gloved hand catching his wrist. "I'm not your enemy," Geralt said quietly.
But if you make me one, I won't stop at warnings." The man hesitated. His comrade groaned, struggling to rise. The Witcher released him, stepped back, and mounted Roach. "Tell your superiors," he said, "that the curse spreading through these lands isn't the work of mages. It's older than your fire. If you keep burning blindly, you'll only feed it." With that, he rode into the forest, leaving the hunters behind among the ashes. The night deepened, the air heavy with the scent of rain again. He rode until the trees thinned and the sky opened above him. A wide plain spread ahead, silver under the moon. Once it had been farmland, but now it lay barren, mounds of dry soil where wheat should have stood. In the distance, a single light flickered. Geralt followed it to a small cottage, standing alone amid the waste. Smoke drifted from its chimney, faint but real. When he knocked, an old man opened the door, lantern trembling in his hand. "Witcher?" he said, squinting. "Or are my eyes failing?" "They're fine," Geralt replied. "I need shelter for the night." The man nodded quickly. "Aye, come in. You'll find little comfort, but warmth enough." Inside, the room smelled of herbs and damp straw. A woman lay on a bed near the hearth, her breathing shallow. The old man glanced toward her with sorrow in his eyes. "My daughter," he said, "fell ill 2 days past. Fever won't break. The healer says it's the curse come from the north, the harvest blight, they call it now." Geralt knelt beside the woman. Her skin was pale, her veins faintly red beneath the surface. He touched her wrist, felt the slow, uneven pulse. "It's spreading faster than I thought," he muttered. "Can you cure her?" the old man asked, voice cracking. Geralt shook his head. "Not cure, but I can slow it." He drew a vial from his satchel, poured a few drops onto the woman's lips. Her breathing steadied, though her eyes did not open. "That'll hold for a day," he said, rising. "No more." The old man bowed his head. "Then we'll have a day more than we did." Geralt took a seat by the fire, removing his gloves. "Tell me," he said after a moment, "when did the blight start?" "After the spring thaw," the man answered. "The fields turned black overnight. Then the fever came. Some said it was punishment for the witch burned in Holmwick last year. Others said the priests angered the gods, but I think," he looked into the flames, "I think the land's just tired of feeding us." Geralt said nothing. He knew the truth was worse. The Harvest King's hunger had not died in the bog. It had found new soil, in human hearts, in fear, in ignorance. It would take more than steel to end it now. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying the smell of distant rain and something else, something faintly sweet, like ripening grain. Geralt's medallion stirred once, then lay still. He looked into the fire, the light flickering across his scarred face. Another dawn would come, and with it another trail to follow. But tonight he allowed himself a single moment of rest. The old man slept at the table. The woman breathed evenly, though her skin glowed faintly with that same red shimmer. Geralt watched her for a long time. Then, quietly, he whispered to the empty air, "Sleep while you can, girl. The harvest isn't done yet." And outside, beyond the walls of the lonely cottage, the barren fields began to stir. Something moved beneath the soil, slow, patient, and alive. Morning came shrouded in fog, heavy and still. The old man was already gone when Geralt opened his eyes, but the fire burned low in the hearth, and the smell of porridge filled the small room. The woman on the bed still breathed, though her skin was pale as parchment. A faint red shimmer moved beneath her flesh, tracing the pattern of veins. Like slow fire, Geralt rose, washed his face in the basin by the door, and stepped outside. The world beyond the cottage was gray, a sea of mist stretching over the plain. The silence was deeper than before, the kind that pressed on the chest. He crouched by the threshold, rubbing a bit of soil between his fingers. It was damp and cold, but not dead. Beneath it, something pulsed faintly, magic, weak, but persistent. He cursed under his breath. The corruption was traveling underground through the roots and rivers. It would spread to every field within a month if left unchecked. The necromancer's ritual had seeded more than a single curse. It had awoken an ancient network that ran beneath these lands like veins beneath skin. He turned back toward the door. Inside, the woman stirred, muttering softly in her fever. Geralt leaned close to listen. Her voice was a whisper, but the words chilled him. He waits in the furrows. The golden crown. The roots drink deep. The same phrases he'd heard in Holmwick, in Bramble Hollow, in the bog. The same litany of the Harvest King's cult. Geralt packed quickly. He left a coin on the table, a witcher's coin marked with the sign of Ard, and stepped out into the fog. Roach stamped impatiently beside the well, her mane damp with dew. Geralt mounted and turned south toward the hills. The road climbed steeply, winding between cliffs. By midday he reached a narrow valley where an old watchtower stood half buried in ivy. Smoke rose from its base. Someone had made camp there. Geralt approached, silently, hand on his sword. 2 men knelt by the fire, sharpening scythes. Not farmers, soldiers by the look of their armor, though none bore insignia. Their faces were hollow with exhaustion, eyes darting like hunted animals. One looked up first and froze. "Easy," Geralt said. "Not here to rob you." The other stood, gripping his blade. "You're a witcher?" Geralt nodded. "What's left of one?" The first man swallowed. "Then maybe you'll know what's happening to us. We were sent here from the garrison at Dorian, ordered to burn the infected fields, but when we lit the fires, the ground moved. Roots came up, burning red. The others ran, but the commander..." His voice cracked. "The ground swallowed him." Geralt crouched by the fire. "Did you see where?" The soldier pointed toward the far end of the valley. "There's a sinkhole near the stream. We heard screams from below. Then silence." Geralt rose. "Stay here. If the ground starts to move again, run north and don't stop." They did not argue. He crossed the valley quickly, the grass crunching underfoot. The air grew colder with every step. Soon he reached the sinkhole, a wide pit rimmed with broken earth, its depths lost to darkness. The stench of rot rose from below. He tied a rope to a boulder, checked the knots, and descended. The light above faded until only the faint glow of his cat potion guided him. The walls of the pit were slick with roots, some thick as his arm, pulsing faintly with red light. At the bottom the air was warm, heavy with decay. He drew his sword and stepped forward. The passage widened into a cavern. In its center lay a great mass of tangled roots, forming something like a throne, and upon it slumped a corpse in rusted armor. The commander, judging by the insignia on his chest. But he was not wholly dead. His eyes opened as Geralt approached, blank, glowing faintly. "Leave." The voice came hollow and distant. "The king sleeps." Geralt circled slowly, searching for the heart of the corruption. It pulsed behind the corpse, deep within the root mass. A faint rhythmic throb, like a heartbeat. He raised his blade and whispered, "Sorry, friend." The corpse moved suddenly, lunging with inhuman speed. Geralt blocked, sparks flying as steel met bone. The man's strength was monstrous, his strikes wild. The Witcher dodged, slashed low, severing the tendons at the knee. The creature fell, still struggling, still whispering that same litany. The king wakes, the harvest comes. Geralt pressed a moon dust bomb into the root mass and leapt back. The explosion filled the cavern with blinding white fire. The roots shrieked, a sound like hundreds of voices, and black smoke poured from the cracks. The commander's body convulsed once, then went still. The glow faded. The heartbeat ceased. Geralt waited until the air cleared, then cut the commander's medallion free and placed it on a rock. Rest now, he muttered. He climbed back to the surface. The sky had cleared. The fog was gone. The soldiers were gone too, their camp abandoned. Only the fire remained, burning low. On the ground beside it lay footprints, deep, irregular, leading east, and a trail of blood. Geralt followed it out of the valley. It led into the forest, twisting between trees until it ended at a small pond. The water was red with reflected sunset, though not with blood. Something gleamed beneath its surface. He knelt and dipped a gloved hand into the pond. His fingers brushed metal, a circlet of gold shaped like a ring of wheat stalks. When he lifted it, drops of water fell like tears. It was warm to the touch. A whisper stirred the air. Crown of the king. Geralt stared at it, his face unreadable. So this is what he left behind, he said softly. The circlet pulsed once, faintly like a heartbeat. Then from the trees behind him, a low growl echoed. Not wolf, not human. Something in between. Geralt turned, sword half drawn. A shape emerged from the shadows, a creature lean and tall, skin pale as bone, eyes red as coals. Its body was draped in remnants of burlap and straw, its movements slow and deliberate. The Witcher spoke quietly. A new servant. The thing hissed, stepping closer, its mouth open too wide, voice like rustling leaves. He calls, "You cannot stop the season." Geralt's answer was his blade. The creature lunged, claws flashing. He met it with a sidestep, slashing across its ribs. Black ichor spilled. It shrieked, the sound splitting the air. The fight was brief but savage, claws tearing, steel cutting. Finally, the Witcher drove his sword through its chest and twisted. The creature stiffened, then crumbled into ash. Geralt stood over the remains, breathing hard. The circlet in his hand had stopped pulsing. The silence returned, heavy but clean. He sheathed his sword and mounted Roach, who waited at the forest's edge, snorting nervously. The road ahead led toward the foothills of Sodden, where the rivers converged, a place where all the land's veins met. If the corruption still spread, that would be its heart. The sun sank behind the trees, and the light turned to amber. Geralt looked once more at the circlet, then slipped it into his pouch. One root burned, he murmured. But the harvest isn't done. He rode on through the darkening forest, the wind rising behind him, carrying faint whispers that rustled through the trees like the sigh of unseen fields. And somewhere, deep beneath the ground, the pulse of the harvest king began again. Slow, steady, waiting. The forest thinned as Geralt neared the foothills, the land rising in long folds of gray stone and moss. The air grew colder, cleaner, yet still carried the faint scent of smoke and damp earth. The Witcher had not spoken a word since leaving the valley. Roach's hooves echoed softly on the old cobbled road. remnants of a forgotten age when kings sent soldiers here and merchants dared to trade through the border passes. Now only the wind moved freely. By dusk, the Witcher reached a small village nestled between the hills. It looked untouched by plague or war, though the fields were empty and the people wary. When Geralt entered the square, heads turned and shutters closed. Only an old man tending the well remained outside. He watched the Witcher approach, eyes bright with something between fear and hope. "You're no priest," the man said. "No knight neither, but you're armed, and that means you can help?" Geralt dismounted. "Depends what's needed." "The water," the man said, nodding toward the well. "It runs black. Cattle that drink it die, the children fall sick. We thought it was the fever from the south, but the healer says it's something else. A curse." Geralt peered into the well. The water below shimmered faintly red, like wine under a torch. His medallion trembled. "Where does your water come from?" he asked. "From the mountain spring. Always been pure until last moon. Then the dreams started." The old man's voice dropped. "The folk wake screaming, saying they saw fields of gold under a red sky. A crowned figure walking among them." Geralt nodded grimly. "The same curse. It's spreading through the river veins." He dropped a small coin into the man's palm. "Buy fresh water from the next village north. Don't drink from this well again." "What will you do?" "Follow it to its source." The old man hesitated. "If you go to the spring, take care. There's something there. A voice calling. It sounds like someone you love. No one who's gone to listen has come back." Geralt said nothing more. He took Roach and set off. Up the mountain path, the last light of day faded behind him and mist crept through the pines. The trail wound higher, the air sharp with cold. After an hour, he came to a narrow ravine where the stream gushed clear and fast over stones. Yet as he followed it upward, the clarity changed. The water darkened, thickening with each turn until it gleamed crimson under the moon. The sound changed too, from a babble to a whisper. Words, "He comes. He reaps, he sows." Geralt's medallion buzzed like an angry hornet. He drew his sword, coating the blade with spectre oil. The smell of it, bitter herbs and sulfur, cut through the damp air. The ravine opened into a hollow. There the spring burst from the rock, its pool wide and still. Around it grew strange flowers, pale gold swaying, though no wind stirred. In the center of the pool rose a mound of roots, woven together like a nest. Upon it stood a figure in tattered robes. She was beautiful once, perhaps, young, fair-haired, with eyes like molten amber, but her skin shimmered with the same unnatural sheen as the cursed soil, and her movements were wrong, too fluid, too slow. In her hands, she held a sickle of bone. "Witcher," she said, her voice soft as water, "you've come far." "Not far enough," Geralt replied. "Who are you?" Her lips curved. "Once I was a priestess of the fields. I tended the harvest rites long before your wars trampled our altars. When men turned from the old ways, I kept faith. I fed the soil as my mothers did, with blood." "The Harvest King's servant," Geralt said. "The last of his brides," she corrected. "The necromancer awoke only a sliver of him. I shall wake the rest, and when the king rises, he will crown this land with gold again." "Gold soaked in corpses," Geralt said. The woman tilted her head, as though listening to something unseen. "You think death ends hunger? Foolish witcher. Death is the plow, life the seed." She raised her hand, and the roots around the pool stirred, splitting the earth. Shapes crawled from the water, skeletal vine-wrapped bodies, faces hidden by stalks of grain. They moved toward Geralt with the slow, patient menace of the inevitable. Geralt stepped back, drew a circle with his free hand, and cast Yrden. The rune flared violet, slowing the creatures as they entered its glow. He struck, each blow measured and clean. Silver met flesh, and where it passed, the vines withered. But the woman did not move. She watched, smiling faintly, as if amused. Then, with a flick of her wrist, she plunged the sickle into the pool. The water turned black, and from its depths rose a shape. Massive, formless, yet terrible. Roots and bones woven together into something like a man crowned with wheat aflame. The Harvest King. Geralt leapt aside as a massive arm of roots crashed into the ground where he had stood. The shock threw him off his feet. He rolled, came up swinging, cleaving through a tendril that sought his leg. Fire would not hold long here. Too much water, too much earth. But he tried anyway. Igni! The flames roared, hissing as they met the damp air. The creature shuddered, its body burning in streaks. But it did not fall. The woman laughed, her voice echoing through the hollow. Do you see now? He cannot die. You feed him with your rage. Geralt spat blood and reached for his last bomb, Demiridium cold and gray. He hurled it into the pool. The explosion silenced the air, snuffing out the whispers. The black water flashed silver, and for a moment the creature faltered. Geralt seized the chance. He charged across the slick stones, vaulted onto the mound, and drove his sword through the woman's chest. She gasped, eyes wide, then smiled even as blood filled her mouth. Reap what you sow, Witcher. She crumbled to dust, and the mound collapsed. The pool exploded in a rush of steam and light. When the smoke cleared, the hollow was still. Only the sound of the stream remained clean again, whispering like any mountain water. Geralt fell to one knee, breathing hard. His sword smoked faintly. Around him, the golden flowers wilted and turned gray. The medallion at his throat stilled. He rose slowly and looked down at the water. The reflection that met him was his own, but behind it, for just a heartbeat, he thought he saw another shape. Tall, crowned, faceless, watching, waiting. He turned away and began the long descent down the mountain. The curse might sleep again, but he doubted it would stay buried forever. Things that fed on faith and fear never truly died. When he reached the valley, the first light of dawn was breaking. The air smelled of pine and fresh water. He filled a flask from the stream and drank. It tasted clean. Perhaps the land would rest now, for a season at least. But as he rode toward the road once more, a gust of wind passed through the trees, carrying with it the faint rustle of grain, though no fields grew there. The sound faded quickly, lost to the morning. Geralt did not look back. He never did. The path awaited, and it was never empty for long. The wind turned colder as Geralt descended from the mountain, carrying with it the scent of snow, though the season was far from winter. He rode through a narrow defile where the rocks glistened with frost, and the trees stood bare, stripped clean as though by some invisible hand. The curse had retreated, but its shadow lingered on the land. He could feel it in the silence of the birds, in the weight of the clouds pressing low above the peaks. At dusk, the path widened, revealing a small monastery clinging to the cliffside like a limpet stone. Smoke curled from its chimneys, and the toll of a single bell drifted faintly through the air. Geralt knew this place by name, if not by sight. The Abbey of the Silent Fields, founded long ago by monks who once tended the old harvest rites. before the eternal fire swept across the north, burning out their altars and their songs. Rumor said some of the old brotherhood still lingered here, though they had sworn never again to speak the names of their forgotten gods. He guided Roach toward the gate. 2 monks stood watch, their robes coarse and gray, their faces shadowed by hoods. They crossed their staffs before him. "No pilgrims today," one said. "I'm not a pilgrim," Geralt replied. "I'm hunting something that came from these hills. A curse tied to the old ways. It's been burning its path north." The second monk lowered his staff slightly. "You're too late. The curse reached us already." They led him through the courtyard. The abbey's walls were cracked, its gardens overgrown with weeds. In the cloister, a group of monks knelt in prayer before a blackened statue that might once have been Melitele, or something older, harder, and less forgiving. The air smelled faintly of incense and mildew. They brought Geralt to the abbot's chamber. The old man who waited there was thin as parchment, his skin drawn tight over his bones, yet his eyes were sharp and bright. "You are the Witcher from Rivia," he said. "We heard you were in these parts." "Then you know why." The abbot nodded slowly. "We've tended the river's spring for generations, keeping its purity with rites forgotten by most. But 3 nights passed, the water turned dark. Our brothers began to dream of fields aflame. Some have not woken since. Show me one." They led him to the infirmary. The rows of cots were filled with motionless figures. Their breathing was shallow, their skin pale, their mouths moving silently. Geralt leaned close to one monk and heard the whisper that came from between cracked lips. "The king walks. The crown of wheat burns." He straightened. "The curse is trying to root again," he said. "Something below this abbey is feeding it." The abbot's expression tightened. "Beneath us lie the crypts of the old order. The first brothers built them to guard their relics. None go there now." "Then I will." The abbot hesitated. "If you fail, Witcher, seal the gate. Better we burn with the curse than let it spread." Geralt said nothing. He followed a young monk through a narrow stairway that spiraled into the rock. The air grew colder, the light dimmer. At the bottom lay a vast crypt, columns carved like sheaves of grain, walls lined with ancient tombs. The Witcher's medallion began to tremble. "Stay here," he told the monk. "If I'm not back by dawn, block the passage." He moved deeper into the dark. The flicker of his torch cast long shadows that danced across the carved walls. Between the sarcophagi he saw movement, figures half-formed, their faces hidden behind veils of cobwebs. They whispered as he passed, voices blending into a low chant. At the far end of the hall, a great door of black wood stood half open. The smell that seeped through was thick and earthy. Geralt pushed it wide. The chamber beyond was circular, its walls inscribed with runes older than the conjunction. At its center rose a mound of soil from which sprouted a single stalk of wheat, golden and whole, glowing with faint light. Around it knelt 3 monks, their bodies rigid, their eyes blind with ecstasy. Geralt stepped forward. "Back away," he ordered. "Now." One of them turned, lips splitting into a smile too wide to be human. "He is risen," the monk rasped. "The king of plenty, the giver of seed." The wheat stalk shivered, and the soil around it moved. A hand burst forth, bone and root entwined, grasping at the air. Geralt swung his sword, severing it at the wrist. The monks screamed as one, collapsing to the floor. The light in the wheat brightened, pulsing like a heart. He hurled a demeridium bomb. The explosion shook the crypt, snuffing the torchlight. When the smoke cleared, the mound was split open. Beneath it, tangled roots glowed with ember-red veins. Something stirred within them, slow and immense. Geralt drew his blade, coating it with spectre oil. He cut deep into the roots. They bled black sap that hissed where it touched stone. The mound convulsed. A voice filled the chamber. Not sound, but pressure, vast and cold. You burn the field, Witcher, but you cannot unmake the soil. Then I'll salt it, Geralt growled. He pressed a rune stone into the wound and chanted the incantation Triss had once taught him, a purifying ward. The roots writhed, the air thickened, and the glow dimmed until only darkness remained. When at last the silence settled, Geralt dropped to one knee, breathing hard. He looked down. The wheat stalk lay crushed at his feet, its gold turned to ash. When he climbed back to the surface, dawn had broken. The fog had lifted from the valley, and the monks were gathered in the courtyard. The abbot met him with weary eyes. "It's done, for now," Geralt said. "Burn the crypt, seal it. The curse sleeps again, but it will dream of waking." The old man nodded. "You've saved what little remains of our order. Take this." He pressed a small medallion into Geralt's palm, a circle of bronze engraved with a single sheaf of wheat. "May it remind you that every harvest ends in fire." Geralt pocketed it, mounted Roach, and rode from the abbey without another word. The morning light was sharp and clear, washing the hills in gold. Yet behind him, smoke soon rose from the mountainside as the monks did their work. He followed the road east toward the plains where the first snow already gathered on the wind. As the day faded, he looked back once more. The abbey's bell tolled a final time, then fell silent. He thought of Elena and Maritka, of the necromancer's laughter, of fields that whispered even when no wind stirred. The path never lacked monsters. It was people who gave them names. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of distant rye and something else, something faint, sweet, and rotten. Geralt's medallion trembled once, then lay still. "Not yet," he murmured, and spurred Roach onward. Far behind him, beneath the smoking abbey, something old turned in the dark earth, dreaming of sun and blood. The plains stretched endlessly ahead, vast and empty beneath a low gray sky. The cold had sharpened overnight, sheathing the grass in a thin skin of frost that glittered like glass. Geralt rode with his cloak drawn tight, the horse's breath rising in white clouds. The abbey was long behind him now, reduced to a smear of smoke against the mountain. Yet he knew the curse was not finished. It never was. Such things clung to the world like burrs on a beast's hide. Cut one root and another crept unseen. By midday he reached a crossroads marked by a crooked signpost. One arm pointed toward Vizima, another toward the Pontar Valley. A third, worn blank by years of rain, led east into a tangle of wood and mist. The path felt wrong, too still, too eager. He dismounted and crouched beside the post. The soil there was darker than the rest, damp though no rain had fallen. He rubbed it between his fingers and frowned. The faint shimmer of red again, the curse's scent. He mounted Roach and turned east. The road wound into a forest where the trees grew twisted and close. The canopy blocked the sun, bathing the path in a dim half-light. Geralt rode for an hour before he saw the first sign of life, a scarecrow standing at the edge of a clearing. It was tall, its frame bound from blackened reeds, its head a gourd carved with a jagged grin. The eyes burned faintly, not with candlelight, but with something deeper, something alive. He dismounted, sword half drawn. The medallion at his throat vibrated like a plucked string. "I've seen uglier omens," he muttered. The scarecrow's head turned, slowly. A faint, rasping laugh drifted from its hollow chest. "The Witcher walks the furrows again," it said in a voice that was half whisper, half rustle. "And still he does not understand the harvest." Geralt's tone was cold. "You talk too much for a pile of straw." "Straw remembers," it hissed. "Soil remembers. Every death feeds the root. The king wakes in every grain. Not if I burn the field." "You burned one," it said. "There are many." The creature's body began to twitch, the reeds tightening into muscle. It tore free of its pole, standing on crooked legs, and lunged. Geralt met it with a sidestep, silver flashing in the gloom. The first strike split its arm, scattering embers and straw. The second severed its head. The body collapsed in a heap, smoldering faintly. He waited, but it did not rise again. The air still thrummed with power, though, the residue of something larger, something watching. He sheathed his sword and examined the stump where the scarecrow had stood. Beneath it, buried shallowly, was a charm of bone carved with the same sunburst sigil. The edges were fresh, newly made, so the cult still lived. He followed the trail north through the forest until dusk. The trees thinned, giving way to a valley where firelight flickered among the ruins of an old manor. Smoke rose from its chimneys, though the building looked long abandoned. Geralt tethered Roach by the gate and approached on foot. The manor's doors hung ajar, the hinges groaning as the wind pushed them. Inside, candlelight trembled over broken furniture and fallen tapestries. In the great hall, a dozen figures knelt in a circle around a low altar. Their faces were hidden beneath burlap hoods, their hands clasped in prayer. Geralt moved silently along the shadows until he saw the altar. Upon it lay a human heart, fresh and still bleeding, placed upon a bed of black grain. "Not the usual supper prayer," he said aloud. The hooded figures froze. Then the one at their center rose, throwing back his hood. It was a man, young, gaunt, his eyes bright with fever. "The White Wolf," he said with something like reverence. "The reaper who cuts what he does not sow. You've come at last." "Save the riddles," Geralt said. "You're feeding the curse." "Why?" "Because the world starves," the man said simply. "The kings fight their wars, and peasants die in fields that yield no bread. The king of the harvest promised abundance. He takes what is owed and gives what is needed." "Dead land doesn't feed anyone," Geralt said. "Only worms." The man smiled faintly. "You've seen a season end, Witcher, but never one begin. The old god returns. The seed grows beneath your feet, even now." He lifted his hands. Around the circle, the others began to chant, low and rhythmic. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of blood and rot. The grain upon the altar stirred, writhing like insects. Geralt drew his sword. "I've had enough of farmers playing God." He hurled a moon dust bomb into the circle. The explosion burst in a flare of white, scattering the cultists. Some screamed, others collapsed. Geralt cut through the haze, his blade flashing. One man fell, then another. The leader raised his arms again, shouting words of power, and the ground split. Roots burst upward, coiling like serpents. Geralt leapt aside, slashing through them. The roots bled red, their sap hissing on the stone. He cast Igni. Fire spread, devouring the floorboards. The roof above groaned. The leader staggered back, coughing blood. "Fool," he gasped. You think fire kills the soil? You feed him. Every spark is a seed. Geralt advanced, sword point steady, then let it burn. He thrust. The blade went through the man's chest, pinning him to the altar. The chanting stopped. The roots writhed once more, then fell still. The manor shuddered as the fire spread. Smoke filled the hall, curling through the rafters. Geralt yanked his sword free, sheathing it as he turned toward the door. Behind him, the roof collapsed in a roar of flame. Outside, he stood in the cold wind, watching the fire consume the ruins. Sparks rose into the night, drifting like fireflies toward the stars. The medallion at his throat stilled. The curse's hum had faded again, faint but not gone. He mounted Roach and rode on. The road led east toward the river. When he reached its banks, he dismounted to water the horse. The surface gleamed silver under the moon, broken only by the slow drift of ash falling from the wind. Geralt knelt, touching the water. It was cold, clean. Yet as he drew his hand away, a single golden grain clung to his skin. It glowed faintly, pulsing once before dissolving into dust. He stared at his palm for a long moment, then wiped it on his cloak. The fire had burned the manor to its bones, but the seed had scattered on the wind. The Harvest King was not finished. Geralt rose, looking east where the moon climbed above the horizon, pale and distant. Somewhere beyond that line lay the next village, the next field, the next story. He would follow it until it ended, or until it found him first. Roach snorted softly. Geralt patted her neck and murmured, "Come on, girl. Let's see if the world's ready for another harvest." They rode into the dark, the wind sighing through the dead grass like a whisper from unseen fields. And far behind, beneath the ashes of the manor, a single sprout pushed through the earth, green, trembling, and hungry. Dawn rose pale and thin, washing the sky with the color of cold iron. Geralt had ridden through the night, following the winding river east, until the plains gave way to low marshland. The air was still, heavy with mist and the faint murmur of unseen frogs. Every sound was distant, muffled, as if the world itself held its breath. The Witcher had long since stopped feeling the chill. He rode in silence, his thoughts a quiet churn of memory and instinct. The manor's smoke had faded hours ago, but he could still taste it in the wind, the scent of scorched earth, of charred flesh and burnt grain. He knew it would not end there. Fire never destroyed such things. It only purified them for a time. Curses like this one burrowed deep, fed by greed and guilt, waiting for new hands to tend them. By midday, he reached a fishing hamlet that squatted by the river's bend. A dozen huts leaned together like beggars for warmth. Smoke rose from one chimney, thin and gray. When he rode into the clearing, the people stopped what they were doing and stared. They were gaunt, eyes sunken, clothes patched too many times to count. An old woman came forward, leaning on a stick. Her face was lined like cracked bark, her eyes a pale blue that missed nothing. "You're the Witcher," she said. It was not a question. Geralt nodded. "You've come too late. The water's gone foul. Fish float, belly up, and the children cough blood. We sent for priests, but none came." Geralt dismounted. "Show me the river." She led him past the huts to a rickety dock. The water that lapped against its posts was thick, dark, almost black. Here and there, bubbles rose lazily to the surface, bursting with a stench of rot. The medallion at his neck began to tremble faintly. He crouched, scooped up a handful of the water, and let it trickle through his fingers. A faint shimmer of red clung to his skin. "It's spreading faster than I thought," he muttered. The woman watched him. "Can you stop it?" "Maybe." "And if you can't?" He looked up at her, the faintest hint of a smile ghosting his lips. "Then I'll make sure it dies trying." He turned back to Roach, unstrapped a satchel, and took out a handful of vials. The potions shimmered with faint colors, green, violet, silver. He drank one, grimaced as the bitterness hit his tongue, and felt the familiar burn of heightened senses rush through his blood. The trail of corruption led away from the river into the reeds. He followed it, sword drawn, the ground sucking at his boots. The air grew thick and warm, filled with the buzzing of flies. Soon the reeds parted to reveal a low rise of earth in the middle of the marsh, a barrow overgrown with moss and crowned by a withered tree. At its roots, the soil pulsed faintly with that same dull red light. Geralt approached carefully, muttering under his breath, "Always a mound, always the dead." As he neared, the air changed. It grew heavy, pressing against his chest. The light dimmed, as if the sun itself dared not look. And then the voice came, soft, deep, the sound of earth shifting. "You reap, Witcher, yet you do not sow." Geralt stopped. His sword glimmered faintly in the gloom. "I sow enough," he said, "just not what you'd like." The barrow split open. Roots tore through the earth, writhing like serpents. A shape rose from the mound, tall, crowned in twisting stalks, its face a mask of bark and bone. The Harvest King, half-formed, his body woven from soil and sinew. Geralt stood his ground. "I've burned your shrines, cut your roots. You should be sleeping." The thing's voice rolled like thunder. "Fire feeds, blood waters. The world is mine to till. Not today." Geralt moved fast as thought. His blade flashed, carving through a root as thick as a man's arm. The air filled with the stink of sap and smoke. The creature struck back, a massive hand of soil and bone smashing into the ground where he had stood. Mud and water exploded in all directions. He rolled, came up inside the circle of its reach, and slashed again. Silver met flesh, leaving a line of white fire across the creature's chest. It roared, the sound shaking the reeds for miles. The ground buckled, spilling bones and skulls from the earth. Geralt cast Yrden, the circle of violet light flaring beneath his boots. The creature slowed, its movements sluggish within the ward's boundary. He took advantage, driving his sword deep into the glowing wound. The king screamed, a sound like 1,000 voices howling from the soil. But even dying, it struck back. A tendril whipped across Geralt's side, flinging him through the air. He hit the mud hard, the wind knocked from him. His ribs ached, his vision swam. The creature loomed above, its crown burning brighter, its voice a whisper of countless harvests gone wrong. "You cannot end the season, Witcher. You are part of it." Geralt's hand found his belt, fingers closing on a flask. He pulled the stopper with his teeth and hurled it at the creature's face. The flask shattered, spilling oil. A heartbeat later, his hand rose. "Igni!" The world turned to fire. The Harvest King bellowed, its body igniting from within, the crown collapsing into embers. Flames leapt skyward, licking the clouds. The roots writhed, clawing at the air, then fell still. The roar faded to a low, dying hum. When at last the light dimmed, the mound was nothing but ash. Geralt staggered to his feet. The marsh was silent again, save for the hiss of cooling embers. His armor was scorched, his lungs ached, but he was alive. He looked down at the ashes, at the faint glow fading beneath them. "No more kings," he said softly. He turned and walked back through the reeds. The river's water was clear now, its surface silver in the light of the setting sun. When he reached the hamlet again, the villagers stood waiting. The old woman stepped forward, her eyes wide. "The water, it's clean again," she said. Geralt nodded. "It will stay that way. For a while." She hesitated. "And the curse?" He swung into Roach's saddle, his expression unreadable. "Curses never die, they just sleep, waiting for fools to wake them." The old woman bowed her head. "Then may the gods keep you on your path." He turned the horse toward the road. Behind him, the river flowed bright and untroubled, carrying the ashes of the Harvest King out to the Pontar. Ahead lay open fields, quiet and gold in the fading light. Geralt rode until the hamlet disappeared behind him. The wind picked up cold and sharp, tugging at his cloak. In the distance, a lark began to sing. For the first time in many days, the Witcher allowed himself a breath that was not filled with smoke or blood. The path stretched before him, long and uncertain. Yet in that moment, beneath the pale sun and endless sky, it seemed almost peaceful. But as night fell, the wind shifted. It carried the scent of rye, of earth freshly turned, of things waiting to grow. Geralt felt the faint tremor of his medallion, the smallest quiver of warning. He smiled bitterly. "Always another harvest," he murmured, and with that he rode on into the dark, the sound of the river fading behind him, the world around him once more holding its breath before the next sowing of death and life alike.